Abdelkader, vice-presidente da Global League and professor da University of Lille. Convidamos ao palco o professor John O.
John O. has 35 years of professional experience in senior management position at the United Nations. He was UNDP resident representative in South Africa, among other positions. He has an abiding interest in issues of governance and particular competence in economy governance, institution building and development policy design and implementation. In the last 5 years, he has focused particularly on the social and economy capacity challenge. We welcome
Daremos início à palestra, por favor, John O.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Prime Minister, fellow panelists. It's my honor and pleasure to facilitate this first session. Just to be clear, I'm a facilitator, so I will not be speaking at all, other than to introduce the panelists and perhaps to offer a few summary points at the beginning and at the end. We've got 3 actual panelists and 1 virtual panelist. I will now introduce 3 actual panelists. Our first speaker after this introduction will be the Prime Minister, His Excellency Jose Maria Pereira Neves, who has been Prime Minister of Cape Verde since 2001 and has won 3 national elections. Under his leadership, Cape Verde has launched the Agenda for Transformation and has undertaken major socio-economic reforms and facilitated one of the most advanced e-governance systems on the continent. Mr. Prime Minister. My second panelist will be Bright B. Simmons. His name, Bright, is both his name and a description. He's a technology innovator, development activist, and social entrepreneur. As an executive at the Accra-based think tank Imani, he contributes to activities that challenge received wisdom about Africa's development challenges. And as president of the M-Pedigree Network, he invented a system that empowers consumers to instantly verify with a free text message whether their medicines are safe and not counterfeit, while providing pharmaceutical companies previously inaccessible market intelligence. As we all know, counterfeit medicines are reckoned by experts to kill at least 2,000 people daily in the developing world and can constitute more than 40% of all medicines on sale in some countries. So Bright is a member of the World Economic Forum's Global Agenda Councils and Technology Pioneers community. He's also a Tech Museum laureate and a Brain Trust member of the Evian Group at IMD. I will now introduce our third panelist, Professor Abdelkader Jeflat, who currently teaches Industrial Development Economics at the University of Lille in France and is director of the Master's Program on International Cooperation. He's chairman of the Maghreb Technology Network and senior researcher at the CLERS Laboratory. He is also a member of the scientific board and vice president of Globalix Network. As professor in economics in the University of Oran in Algeria, he held the position of Dean of the Faculty of Economics and was then chairman of scientific committee. He was also principal consultant and member of the ad hoc committee on knowledge-based economy of the National Economic and Social Council of Algeria. He has been one of the main consultants for the World Bank Institute since 2002 on knowledge-based economy for the Middle East and North Africa region, as an expert at the United Nations Commission for West Africa, ESCWA, as well as the Economic Commission for Africa. Our fourth panelist is Mr. Francis Gorrie, who is the Director General of WIPO, appointed in 2008. He has served on the WIPO top management team from 1997, initially as Assistant Director General, and from 2003 as the Deputy Director General with responsibility for patents and the PCT system, the Arbitration and Mediation Center, traditional knowledge, traditional cultural expressions, and genetic resources. Mr. Gorrie holds law degrees from the University of Melbourne and a PhD from the University of Cambridge. He is the author of numerous publications and articles on intellectual property and in international journals. My name is John Ohiorenwa, and it's my pleasure to be your facilitator. Now, the first session is on Africa and the transformation agenda. And before I call on the first panelist, I just wanted to bring a few issues, a few points for your consideration. First, that innovation is not and has never been only about technology, although technology is a major element in the innovation domain. Organizational, managerial, and social capabilities are major manifestations of the innovative process. Workflow, time and motion processes, and decision-making structures have been major areas of innovation. Second, innovation is not a specialized subject, even though it is taught in many places as a specialist course. Everyone has the capacity to be innovative in whatever occupation they are engaged in. The critical element is learning to recognize episodes of innovation. The research scientist or design engineer is trained to recognize a eureka moment. That capacity needs to be more society-wide. Thirdly, innovation cannot be nurtured in isolation. It's not enough to have specialist institutions to promote innovation. Such institutions need to be accompanied by an appropriate regulatory and incentive framework and an open learning regime that enables society-wide access to information and data. Fourth, much as innovation depends on the society's stock of embodied knowledge and tacit knowledge, embodied technology and tacit knowledge, the process of innovation grows out of a complex of interactions between producers and users of services and products, and the policy regime that stimulates and supports these interactions. Fifth, innovation does not always elicit a structural break in processes. More often than not, it is incremental. It's the little changes over time that add up to a big bang. Sixth, trial and error, learning by doing, and learning from past mistakes and successes have historically been the backbone of innovation in the context of social and economic development. And finally, in today's digital world, there is so much potential for transcending the constraints of space and time on knowledge, on learning, and the sharing of experiences. I bring these points to your attention as backdrop for the discussion. After the panelists, I'm going to come to the audience for what I hope will be a very active, interactive process. It's now my pleasure to call on Prime Minister Neves to make his statement. Thank you.
Bom dia. Vou falar rapidamente sobre Cabo Verde, a experiência de Cabo Verde.
I talk to you about the experience of Cabo Verde in the field of transformation of our economy. I am not a specialist in science and technology, but I must admit that I do acknowledge the importance of this summit. I was always very keen on law, and I was at the Faculty of Law at Coimbra. And upon the insistence of former Prime Minister Pedro Pires, I gave up the Faculty of Law in Coimbra, and I attended a school of commerce and negotiation in Brazil, and studied business management in Brazil. So I started learning about the theory of organizations, and at that time we did start talking about different theories of development of organizations and competitiveness and so on. We also spoke about concepts related to engineering within organizations. We also discussed the concept of transformation of organizations. Now we have drawn a number of conclusions during various seminars. And the conclusion is that in order to transform an organization, it is absolutely essential to have this capacity of knowledge creation. And we also need to introduce positive changes, which at the end of the day,
para inovar, ou seja, para introduzir mudanças positivas numa organização,
in order to introduce positive changes in an organization,
temos de criar ideias novas, temos de criar conhecimento.
We have to create knowledge, but at the same time, we have come to the conclusion that transformation has nothing to do with the realization of changes, of small changes, of transformation, so that these small changes could ultimately lead to more deeper changes, more radical changes, more serious changes with by trying to construct something new. In order to transform an organization, in order to transform a country, to start with, we need to create new ideas, we have to create knowledge, but at the same time, we have to build a vision for the future.
Transformação que nos leva à criação de algo novo, de algo substancialmente diferente. E para transformar, há com certeza que criar um ambiente favorecedor de criação, um ambiente favorecedor de inovação. E porque, como também digo sempre, a inovação, a transformação é ir para além do óbvio e do evidente, é quebrar as rotinas, é sonhar com algo de completamente diferente, é trazer para a arena do presente algumas loucuras que poderão ser utópicas para o momento presente, mas capazes de despertar interrogações, de despertar nas pessoas o desejo de fazer algo de novo, algo de diferente. Em Cabo Verde, desde 2001, temos insistido nesta ideia de transformação do país. Cabo Verde tem de transformar-se radicalmente, profundamente. E esse processo de transformação econômica, social, política, cultural, para construirmos um Cabo Verde substancialmente diferente. Durante esses anos todos nós vivemos fundamentalmente da ajuda externa, da remessa dos imigrantes. Nós estamos num processo de transição para um país de rendimento médio. Temos de agora criar as nossas próprias riquezas, temos de agora andar com os nossos próprios pés. Já dizia Amílcar Cabral que por mais quente que seja a água da fonte, ela não cozerá o teu arroz. Portanto, temos de sermos nós aqui em Cabo Verde a fazer o nosso trabalho de casa, a cozinhar o nosso arroz, independentemente da água que terá de vir da fonte. E para conseguirmos isso, nós temos de criar aqui as bases. E só para um país sem
for a country without gold, diamonds, and traditional natural resources, and which only has a great creative capacity, a great capacity for innovation and for inventing the future, we can transform Cape Verde. Our idea is to transform Cape Verde into an international service provision center such that our comparative advantages can be transformed into sources of competitive advantages. And one of the main ways of getting there is through good governance. And for us to carry out good governance, on the one hand, we have to have good conditions of governability, and on the other hand, create institutions capable of providing responses to the demands and requirements of the transformational process. We insist on the idea of a wide-reaching re-engineering of Cape Verdean public administration. As such, for over 10 years ago, we created the Agency for the Information Society, NOSI, the Operational Informational Society Nucleus, which has led the transformational process of our public institutions. We have a number of innovative products. For example, we have the integrated governance system, the electronic budget management system, which recently won the first African Public Sector Innovation Prize. Our idea is not only to have e-government, but also to have I-government, an integrated administration, which integrates various different platforms, various different services, in order to provide more immediate responses to people and to citizens. We have the House of the Citizen, which is a one-stop shop that integrates various different services. And at the House of the Citizen, for example, you can create a business in one day, on the spot. You can get online certificates, carry out electronic payments, and a series of other services that allow immediate interaction between citizens and public administration. We are now we're in the process of creating a one-stop shop for investments, in which investors can, based on the integration of various different services, turn in investment projects in Cape Verde and follow the entire démarche of all of the processes up to and including the end of the process, so that they can know where any blockages are, so that they can interact with public administration immediately and resolve their problems. We are creating the foreign trade one-stop shop, which will allow for a wide-reaching dematerialization and deterritorialization of Cape Verde's Customs Department, which will bring us enormous gains in internal and foreign trade. We are also creating the National Civil Identification and Authentication System, which will integrate all of people's data and information. We'll have a single identification card. We will have a single residence card for foreigners. We will have electronic passports, and we are going to have a a completely integrated voter registration base, which will allow for the integration of all available data. We are working towards having a territorial information system which will allow for the development of land registries and a series of other information for the integrated management of land, the democratization of access to land, for the strategic administration and management of our territory, and for the integrated development of a series of different issues. So in public administration, we believe that it is fundamental to look at things from the perspective of the integration of various different services through technological platforms that are innovative and which can revolutionize the relationship between the state and citizens through the re-engineering and the rupture of existing organizational paradigms. We believe that Africa should invest strongly in the modernization of its administration, in the creation of universities of reference, in the creation of centers of research and innovation, and the development of human capital. And this has to be done in an integrated manner in Africa through an agenda to be defined by the African continent itself, so that we will be able to take advantage of all of our potentials and all of our capacities here in Africa. If there is an issue that we should take into account, is that it is that Africa has a great potential for creation and innovation. It has great talents. All you have to do is look at, see what happens in the realm of music. You just have to look at literary creation. All you have to do is look at the various different African experience and of African civilizations up to the 16th century, where we see a great capacity to innovate and create on the African continent. So that we can today, with a strong agenda geared towards agenda and knowledge, to have the conditions necessary to create new ideas for innovation and for the transformation of the African continent. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. I would, without further ado, call on Mr. Bright Simmons for his own contribution.
Thank you. First of all, I'm extremely grateful for the opportunity to be in Cabo Verde. It's an amazing country. In the short time that I've been here, I've been extremely excited at the pace of progress of this beautiful island. Having said that, I also like to thank our facilitator for setting us on a very interesting course by pointing out that innovation is not strictly technological in character, and that innovation comes in all variety. That is a very important premise for this discussion, in my view. However, the truth is that I'm a technology entrepreneur, and it is in technology that I have been most lucky and fortunate to interact with innovation. So most of my comments will be oriented towards technology innovation in Africa. And I'll start off with two broad questions. The first question being whether indeed there is something that you can point out to and say, this is Africa innovation, African technological innovation in particular. I think that's a very important point. Some have made the argument that just as we don't have African biology or African chemistry or African mathematics, that perhaps any notion of African technological innovation is hollow. And that is an important question that I think we should grapple with. Whether, given our peculiar circumstances, we can describe something as African technological innovation. The second question that I think we should avert our minds to is whether, from a political economy point of view, innovation is always a win-win, or whether we should advise ourselves about the very fact that innovation spawns losers and winners. And by spawning losers and winners, it brings us into the state of political economy of innovation, which is a completely under-addressed and underdeveloped theory and practice in our part of the world. We haven't sufficiently looked at the forces that are arrayed against technological innovation or innovation in general. And having given presence of thought to this particular potential distinction of innovation, both as a leveler but also as a disruptor, we can then begin to address what are the peculiar circumstances in our African situation that will shape the future of our innovation systems. Because as the Prime Minister has very carefully pointed out, innovation cannot be treated in abstract. And here I believe is the fundamental difference between invention and innovation. To me, invention is particularly individualistic. And just as we've seen throughout history, where people have come up with groundbreaking ideas that have changed a lot of things from their garages, what we've not seen is the fact that for those types of innovations to have the dramatic impact that they can have, you do require a system. You do require an integrated social ecosystem for that invention to have an impact. To me, that is the domain of innovation. So innovation is profoundly social in character, profoundly social in the way that it's designed. And here, at this point, I believe we delve into what can become, if we pay close attention to it, African technological innovation. The distinct character of our type of technological innovation. Why do I say this? Just like invention up to a point, innovation is also a product of its circumstances and the pressures that induce that innovation. Now, those pressures are obviously different depending on the continent that you're on. And in our part of the world, we are faced with broadly three crises. One is a crisis of our global role and identity as Africans, how we are perceived by the rest of the world, and how our problems are defined for us in the context of that perception. That is the first crisis. The second crisis is the crisis that you might call a crisis of anachronism, which is that Africa is solving problems which the rest of the world has moved on from. And that creates a completely different type of environment for the achievement of certain goals in innovation. The third crisis that we have is by and large not a crisis at all in a certain sense. Because what we are seeing is a convergence of two demographic forces. In that Africa is a continent that reveres the old, but it's also the youngest continent. And the demographic dividend, in a certain sense, has its own dynamics, in the sense that there is not a continent that is, in the past, have been very open to youthful expression. Unfortunately or fortunately, technological innovation throughout the world is primarily a matter of youthful expression. It's young people the world over who are driving some of the most forceful changes in the domain of technology innovation. To what extent are young people going to be allowed to upend institutions that have taken so long to entrench in Africa? And that goes to my second question, which is that who fears innovation? Are there forces in Africa or elsewhere for whom innovation is a potential threat? And if innovation is a potential threat, and it's a largely youthful expression in most areas, I'm not saying that it's confined to the youth, of course, far from that. I'm just saying that it's tended to be the case that innovation has been driven by the youth, by those on the fringes, by the radical edges of our society. If that is true, or at least true to an extent, and the fact that there are institutions that benefit from the lack of innovation, then innovation is primarily a political revolutionary statement of intent. And so there must be people that benefit from the status quo for whom innovation cannot be welcome. Because that is a political economy approach to innovation in Africa. And I'll use a very short example about my own work that our facilitator very graciously referred to, which is trying to prevent the circulation of counterfeit products, particularly medicines. Now, when we first commenced this process, our first thought was that the pharmaceutical industry should be our first point of call. Because if you think of it, they have the resources to implement changes that will enable the consumer to protect themselves from the effects of counterfeit medicines or other counterfeit products. But better than that, they also have the financial incentive, because counterfeit products necessarily undermine their profits. What we did not prepare ourselves for was the extent to which corruption within the pharmaceutical industry itself could serve as a barrier for adoption of our technology. And in my view, the more that I think about the potential of innovation to transform Africa, the more I worry that we are not paying close attention to the context within which technology is disruptive. Because if technology is disruptive, then only progressive forces aligned together, working in a particular direction, can cause the uptake of truly transformative technology. And here we come upon a very important point, which is that there are technological innovations that elsewhere are transformative. So you can think of social media in the West and social media in parts of the Arab world, for instance, which, because of the peculiar circumstances of those regions, have yielded extraordinarily transformative results. But the truth is also that in our part of the world, some of these supposedly transformative and disruptive technologies elsewhere do very little for us. Because of the particular political, social, and economic pressures of our region, those technologies that are radical and transformative and disruptive are simply not radical, not transformative, and not disruptive. And that brings us to the point where we now have to begin to take over the agenda of technology development and innovation in our continent in a way that recognizes the geopolitics of innovation. Because, as my friend Herman Shenerhersi, who I was sitting with a couple of minutes ago, would tell you, we live in a continent where increasingly the kinds of technologies that are adopted by our governments, the kinds of technologies that are adopted by big corporations, by mines and dams, and some of the biggest projects that you see are uncritically non-African in their orientation, in their character, but more important than everything else, in terms of their benefit to the people. This is the reality of the situation. That is the geopolitics within which we operate in. If we blind ourselves to this geopolitics, to the fact that we live in a world that is competitive, where different regions are sometimes pitted against each other, notwithstanding globalization, and where innovators in one particular part of the region can cause dramatic changes that benefit that region more than the rest of the world, where innovations invented in France or in Europe or in Germany or in the United States may not necessarily be disruptive in our context because they are not designed with the particular circumstance that we have. If we consider all that, then to me the fundamental essence of our innovation struggle is political economic in nature. It is geopolitical in nature. It's recognizing the fact that you require a political economy that is acknowledging the global dynamics of power. We've all heard recently about the Snowden revelations in the United States, where it's been demonstrated now beyond every doubt that technology platforms that we consider to be globalization platforms are actually controlled by the United States government, where there are mechanisms and channels of control that are in the hands of powerful Western interests. That is the reality. So if you believe that your Twitter or your Facebook is an innocuous globalization channel, and that everybody uses it the same way, and that there's no true control over the internet, etc., you're clearly naive. And we've seen that evidence now. We've seen that intelligence agencies in parts of the world control the channels through which these innovations are delivered, and that they serve national security purposes. It's evident now to us. So when we sit in Africa and continue to say that because of globalization, we did not require an Africa agenda on innovation and technology, that would be continental naivety of unbelievable proportions. The time has come for us to recognize that technology and innovation are geopolitical in origin, context, and character, and that our change is a political change. We cannot address the benefits of technology, the benefits of innovation, without sufficient attention being paid to the geopolitical, to the international political economy of innovation, ever.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Bright. I will not comment yet on what you've just said, but I'll call on the professor to make his, he has a PowerPoint presentation. Is it set up?
Is it how it moves? Ah, okay.
I was waiting for mine as well.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Mr. President, Mr. Prime Minister, I would like to say how pleased I am to be in Cabo Verde, which I see for the first time, and with all the beauty of the landscape. I would like also to thank the organizers for inviting me to share some of the views and some of the thinking we have been doing on innovation for the last 1 decade or 2 decades, I would say, particularly looking at the African context. I am very pleased also to be the third speaker, because the Prime Minister addressed the service innovation issues, and our friend put it in a geopolitical context, which is quite right. I'm trying to challenge and to say yes, but also industry matters for African transformation. I think that it's time we look also at industry and not let it only for the others. So bear with me, please. I have few PowerPoints, but I will be very quick in going to the hard issues. Characterizing the African manufacturing sector first, rapidly, then possibly raising the issue of the place and role of innovation in industrial transformation. Third point, new era and new prospects for Africa, and to end up with issues and challenges. I will skip this because I was just thinking what has changed since 1979 to 2014. We could see that some things have progressed, but others have stagnated and regressed, and amongst these, innovation performances. That's all I would say. Of course, if I have time, we will go back onto these issues. But first point is the characteristics of innovation. Of course, everybody has now drawn the attention on the virtues of going into industrial sector that is not neglecting the agriculture, of course. In terms of increasing returns, dynamic imperfect competition, stable price, generally semi-skilled labor, and more stable wage, and that kind of thing. Looking back at history, we see that industrialization is not new to the continent. It was part of the economic development policies throughout the decades, starting right away from the adoption of the industrialization strategy in the development agenda back in the 60s, 70s, where many countries adopted the industrialization import substitution model. Of course, we know all what happened to that model with difficulties. Then the 80s with structural adjustment, which brought liberalization, but also desindustrialization. In other words, we saw that Africa went back on the industrial agenda and industrial performances. And of course, right now, new initiatives coming here and there on reindustrialization Africa, and several initiatives, including Nepal. And of course, if we look at the performances, we could see that the share of manufactured value added to Africa is still the lowest if we compare Africa, Asia, and Latin America, less than 3.5% there, latest figures, which, sorry, it didn't come here. Oops. I don't know what happened. Okay, something is wrong. Labor productivity also has been going down. We see that Africa is at bottom, particularly sub-Saharan Africa, when you look at productivity growth over these years, or this last decade, 2 decades. With falling industrial outputs in various countries, and have just taken an example from one country where we see over the last few years all outputs are falling. And of course, most important of that is the productivity growth in Africa, which, as we know that if transformation is to occur, then labor should flow from low productivity to high productivity sector activities. And we see that labor productivity growth in sub-Saharan Africa has been lower than in most other developing countries, around 2% per year. And of course, this has to be addressed seriously if we want Africa to transform through industrialization. Of course, domestic productivity, and of course, in all that, industrial employment is mostly created in informal manufacturing activities, as you could see some of these figures, 81% as opposed to only 19% in the formal sector. And of course, a lot of many analyses have shown that there are still several problems manufacturing industry are suffering from. I will not go through the list, but mostly infrastructure bottlenecks, unreliable, expensive power supply, poor transportation, lack of skilled labor, red tape, high financing costs, and fierce competition at home and abroad from the so-called emerging countries, India, China. Second point, industrialization without innovation. Is it feasible? Is it possible right now? The answer is quite obvious. We cannot. Innovation, as you can see, in African context is still very low. If we look at this analysis from the World Bank, you see that Africa is still the lowest in these performances on the innovation pillar as compared to other parts of the world. So innovation isn't there in Africa, right as we would expect it to get the right transformation. Of course, I will not go into all details, figures. Some other people are talking in details about performances in innovation. Simply, if you could see that the R&D, a percentage of GDP, 9 out of the 12 countries in the sample have less than 0.5% of GDP, which is really low as compared to people who became emergent and make that takeoff, that transformation stage went through successfully. And of course, development without science and technology, no African state still, as I said, reached the 1% R&D except few, South Africa, Tunisia, Malawi, Uganda, and yet it was specifically targeted in 1980 as one of the major targets from the OAU. All these lost years, we will call the concept lost years in all fields. We call it still, it applies also of science, technology, and innovation. So many lost years we could have actually overcome. Innovation systems, innovation are immature, disarticulated, weak linkages, and we've been talking about the integrated approach. The number of scientists and other relevant experts is not up to it, and weak institutional base, and of course absorption capacity, which is a key issue we need to address if we want to do the transformation. And of course, if we look at competitiveness, you see the African in blue and white is lower in the hierarchy in terms of competitiveness index because of that very deficit in innovation and particularly industrial innovation. And knowledge economy index, and the world shows that, of course, more broadly than innovation, knowledge is also a major deficit if we look at these figures from the World Bank. And there are some other sources we could mention. And as we could see, if we look at people who went from resource-based to innovative and dynamic innovative, knowledge-driven economies, they went through stages, resource-driven, this is an example of Finland, for instance, to investment-driven, to knowledge-driven. And we seem to be stuck at the resource-driven economy, so our challenge is how to move to at least to investment-driven and gradually to knowledge-driven economies in Africa, and it requires strategy, of course. The new era and new prospects for Africa. Things are looking a lot brighter than what I have been presenting, I hope. We see that commodity prices, of course, index is up and for some years and holding that position quite successfully. We hope it will continue, of course, for the sake of Africa. And average rate of growth, as you can see, has been, everybody says it's quite remarkable for the last few years. From 2000 and 2009, it was average 5.1, and then going to 4.8, 4.9, 5.3, latest figure in 2012. So that is holding very well. And the current opportunities, we see, of course, here and there, industrial and manufacturing sectors is becoming a reality in Africa. It's not a dream, but it is a reality. We could see a contribution up to 18 to 20% in GDP in various countries, Ivory Coast, Cameroon, Egypt, Mauritius, Morocco, Madagascar, Namibia, and so on, so forth. The pressure, the transformative pressure, is more felt. I think African countries are more sensitive to this pressure, whereas it wasn't the case before. And this is, of course, a sign of hope that this transformative pressure, because of open economy, more open economy is going to work. 2010, also, we could see African export manufactured goods, although they are still low, but $95 billion through our WTO figures, mostly to Europe, of course, but there is signs of diversification, and the service sector is 40% to GDP growing. And, of course, traditional sectors are basically the sectors which should be the driving engines, because there is some accumulated experience, tacit knowledge, as was mentioned earlier, and of course accumulated learning by doing the do-I concept: food processing, textile, leather, minerals, wood, automobile, pharmaceuticals, but also new sectors like machinery and equipment, transport equipment. We could see very good performances in terms of exports. That is a sign that they are succeeding in competing abroad. Aeronautics, of course, is burgeoning here and there. We have examples from Morocco. Technological textile is becoming a reality. Tunisia is the 7th exporter of textile to Europe. And chemical industry, so industrialization is becoming a reality, but of course not perhaps to the level where we'd expect it to be a transformative and of the African growth challenge. And back to the innovation STI, there are also hopes. We see that in many industrial policies, there is embedded industrial, scientific, specific science and technology innovation policies, if you look at them, like stimulating, improving technology imports, improving R&D, that is embedded in industrial policies, strengthening technological infrastructure, strengthening intellectual property rights. All this is there. And of course, some issues we think are hard issues to be addressed in the future if we want industry to transform Africa towards growth and inclusive development, build strong and inclusive national innovation systems, which is not the case right now. These are the key issue we address in the Africa Leaks and the Global Leaks network. We will be presenting that on the 3rd day. And of course, the productivity gap, although it is a negative point, is also a potential hope, because there are so many unexploited potentials for technology learning and from abroad. The presence of BRICS in Africa might be looked at a threat, but it's also an opportunity offering technologies that are closer to the needs of the least developing countries like Africa. New contracts should be worked out in connection with trade and FDI, and we see examples here and there where FDI is a really driving engine of innovation through spillover, and that has been, of course, deepened. And macroeconomic condition for development, of course, this is general macroeconomic stability, investment and finance. Colleagues talked about it. Human resource, education and learning systems, there will be a panel on that. And of course, public policy, which should be non-discriminatory, policy learning, environmental policy, a new global regime for knowledge sharing and knowledge protection, and an integrated African regional approach to industry and innovation. And thank you very much. Sorry if I have taken a few minutes.
Okay. Thank you, Professor. I would like to have the presentation of the WIPO DG now, if I may. Are we ready? Or should we go to the interactive? Okay, I think we should, because we are running out of time, we should probably go on to the interactive session. There are, I think, a couple of issues that I would like to highlight that came out from the conversation. We did hear the Prime Minister call for an African agenda, and I'm glad that both the AU and the ADB are here to take that and to listen to see what they can do with that. We also heard from Bright about the profoundly political nature of the struggle for innovation, to put it that way. So there are, I think we need to communicate better. We shall revert to this. Thank you.
Honourable Ministers, Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, it's really a privilege for me to have this opportunity to say a few words to you at the outset of the Africa Innovation Summit. Let me start by congratulating the organisers, the government of Cabo Verde, the African Development Bank and IHABA. I think it is a wonderful initiative and a very timely initiative to organise this summit. Innovation is the major component of economic growth, the major contributor to economic growth. It's the source of new and better jobs. It is the major way in which enterprises, industries and whole economies are able to compete and to distinguish themselves and to gain competitiveness. It is the source of great improvements in our quality of life, and it is the way in which, as a society, we respond to major challenges such as food security, climate change, or the need for new medicines. Innovation is the source by which we tackle and confront these social challenges. Not surprisingly, a recognition of the benefits of innovation, these benefits of innovation, not surprisingly has led to much greater economic attention amongst policymakers to innovation, and innovation has become a major focus for economic strategy. It is attracting greater and greater investments around the world. Intellectual property is a vital component in a healthy innovation ecosystem. What intellectual property does is capture the economic value of innovation. It protects the value added that is contributed by innovation. It provides a framework for the long and often hazardous journey of an idea from the stage of being an idea to the marketplace in the form of a saleable commodity or product or service. Let me take the example of the iPhone. The iPhone added $30 billion of value to the Apple Corporation after the first 4 years of its introduction to the market. When you look at the iPhone, it was not just function and patented technology. In fact, function and patented technology accounted for only 25 to 30% of the innovation in the iPhone. The rest was design, branding, marketing, image, and software. So I think we need a comprehensive notion of how innovation is constructed. Likewise, I think innovation occurs at all levels of the economy. We have, at the World Intellectual Property Organization, we have been doing a very interesting project in our Committee on Development and Intellectual Property on Africa and the informal economy. And we have found that in the informal sector, innovation is alive and well. It's alive and well with respect to herbal medicine, with respect to metal manufacturing, with respect to household and beauty products, such as castor oil for babies or soap. Innovation can occur in any way to introduce competitiveness to products and services at any level of the economy and in a very comprehensive manner. I notice that your program is also focusing on hubs and innovation hubs. These are vital as means of concentrating expertise and developing innovation excellence. We found in producing the Global Innovation Index in 2013, in which we looked at this very subject of local innovation, we found that indeed it is perhaps not better not to try to emulate Silicon Valley always, which many people and places have tried to do around the world, but to focus on local advantages, local characteristics. What is the innovation that is occurring naturally and organically in a place, and to build upon that. As I said at the outset, I think it is very timely, if I may say, for the Africa Innovation Summit to be held. Growth rates are stabilizing in Africa. It is the time for Africa. It is the time for Africa to commence the intensive process of adding value, and innovation will be the principal vehicle by which this is done. I wish you all a very successful summit. I thank you very much for the opportunity to have been able to say a few words, and I wish you well.
Okay, well, sorry about that miscommunication. We can probably now go to the interactive session. This first plenary session is about innovation and Africa's transformation. And there are a few critical questions that we do need to try and address and to put into perspective for the later sessions. First of all, what is innovation from Africa's perspective? We've heard that innovation is technology, but it's more than that. We've heard that it's profoundly social and it's political. We've heard that it's driven by youth, and therefore Africa could have a great advantage in that respect. But we've also heard that we need an African agenda, and the African agenda is driven by the status quo. There is a tension there, if I may say so, between that, the innate, the inherent ability of young people to drive an innovation process, and the reality of having an agenda being defined by the status quo, which may or may not be part of the problem. How we get out of that dilemma, I think, is one issue that we need to consider. Secondly, what do our goals have to be? There is a growing consensus after sort of a few decades of wandering in the wilderness from an economic point of view that Africa does need to do its own industrialization. But we had, on the one hand, how that process has tended to flow from resource-based to now to knowledge-driven. Now, if you're going to build on the basis of what you have, the tendency is to focus on your resources, on what you have. But if we're going to deal with what Bright calls the crisis of anachronism, we probably need to be thinking about the service and the knowledge economy. And we know from what Cape Verde is doing, there is potential in this respect. But it's a larger landscape of the continent that we probably need to consider. So these are some of the questions that I think we need to focus on. What needs to be an African agenda? And I think it needs to think not just on what the substance is, but the process by which that agenda will be driven. If it is global, if it's geopolitical, then it's not just the substance, the process is as important. Now, that's my 2 bits, addition to the excellent presentations from our panelists. It's now my pleasure to ask if there are comments or questions from the audience. I don't think we have as much time as we thought we'll have, but I think we can have at least 15, 20 minutes. So who would like to start? If nobody says anything, I'm going to volunteer somebody. Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. My name is Rifat Latifi. I'm a surgeon by training, and I was very pleased to hear extremely good panelists defining the future of African innovations and how we do it and what we need to do. I think the bottom line of innovation is that people should benefit from it. I will give you one example. For the last 2 years, I have been honored to help Minister of Health of this great country to do telemedicine project in all the islands. We did not need to invent the Polycom or any of the video conferencing unit. What we had needed to do is invent the ability that the patients from any island in this beautiful country connect to the specialists in Praia or in Mandela. So as I just came last night from Sal, And I can tell you that 2 patients last night did not need to travel from Sal to Mindelo or to Praia because they seen the specialist across the video conferencing and the telemedicine project. So I think it's a great idea to do great innovations and go to moon if we can, but we can actually use existing technology with a very cheap way, a very innovative way to actually help our people and help wherever they might be. So I just wanted to congratulate the Prime Minister and this country on doing this project, because I think it's one of the best one in the world, and certainly one of the best that I know in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, sir.
I think in terms of technological innovation, for example, I think that the older generation had a process of problem solving whereby, in very simple terms, you looked at a problem, you identified it, you defined it, you analyzed it, you did a prognosis, then you had an idea of a possible solution, then you experimented on it. The younger generation does not have time for that. They do a very rapid process of trial and error. If you ever really ask your nephew or your niece to fix your computer, you see what they do. They just try, and somewhere something goes right. So there's a whole intellectual difference going there. But more importantly, and I stand very strongly by you, the geopolitical challenge of innovation goes back to the political weakness of the African evolution over the last 50 years of independence. At some point in the life of a people, they must have the courage to determine where they want to go there with whatever they have, no matter how inadequate, convinced that they will get there somewhere. They must have the courage to reject what is free and useless, rather than compromise what they have because they cannot say no. But above all, they must also have the courage to believe that somehow all societies have their own different structure of what is good, what is bad, what is desirable, and therefore structure their innovation and their invention along the lines of what I might call authentic objectives. Thank you.
Thank you. I think there is someone over there. No, not you. And you after this, sir. I'll take him first and then you.
Yes, good morning. My name is William Asiko, and I run an organization called the Investment Climate Facility for Africa. And we help governments in Africa to implement largely IT systems to transform their economies and make them more attractive to investment. And in fact, in that capacity, we are doing some projects right here in Cape Verde. My question is to the Honorable Prime Minister. Your Excellency, one of the biggest challenges that we find in implementing some of the projects that we run is the resistance to change that innovation brings. And we find that even sometimes when the leadership might have agreed or are interested in implementing the innovation, that officials lower down resist, largely because of either ignorance or even vested interests. How has Cape Verde been successful in avoiding this? Because obviously we've made great strides in achieving innovation and transforming your economy. What advice would you have for organizations like us and for other African governments in avoiding this very strong resistance to change? Thank you.
Okay. I'll take you, sir, and then I'll ask the Prime Minister to respond.
Oui, bonjour, Christian Brodag, je représente ici l'Organisation internationale de la francophonie. Nous sommes en train de lancer un réseau sur l'innovation donc dans l'espace francophone, donc évidemment aussi couvrant l'Afrique, sachant qu'effectivement la dimension réseau-échange est fondamentale pour diffuser les pratiques d'innovation et permettre aussi la constitution d'écosystèmes d'innovation autour d'un certain nombre d'innovations où la dimension réseau, mobilisation de différents acteurs publics, privés, ONG, citoyens, enfin une vision de l'innovation qui s'appuie sur ces réseaux. Donc la francophonie est en train de lancer ce réseau. Il devrait y avoir au mois de septembre un forum à Dakar dans le processus de préparation du sommet des chefs d'État. Donc nous nous réjouissons de cette initiative ici sur cette innovation en Afrique et en étant vraiment à l'écoute, quelle synergie il peut y avoir entre les différentes communautés linguistiques, lusophones, anglophones et francophones autour de l'innovation en Afrique. Je vous remercie.
Merci. Mr. Prime Minister.
Bom, a questão aqui colocada ao Primeiro-Ministro tem a ver essencialmente com a construção da sociedade de informação e as resistências. Nós aqui temos dois níveis. Há muitas mudanças profundas,
very profound changes on the level of the state and administration, which should merit in democratic societies such as ours, which should merit consensus on the part of Parliament or political society. Here, first and foremost, we need to have a great capacity for negotiation in order to build essential consensus for the construction of the information society. There is a certain degree of resistance on the part of administration, and I think that here fundamentally we have to have the leadership capacity. The issue of the information society should be at the highest level of governance. There has to be political will and a strong leadership capacity on the part of those who lead the government in order to break the obstacles and break through the borders and limits that are placed by the interests invested in bureaucracy. And if we have this leadership capacity, this capacity to motivate, to provide vision, and to occupy vacuums and create the conditions for a change to happen, these changes will certainly take place. As Machiavelli said, the hardest thing in a society is to create a new law, because there are people who don't know if they're going to benefit from this new law, and there are others who do benefit from the old law and are not willing to change in order to change over to a new law. If there is a strong leadership capacity on the country level, it is possible to build the conditions necessary to carry changes out on these two levels, on the political level and on the technical and administrative level.
Jeff Flatt, do you have any comments?
Yes, thank you. A few comments here. First of all, regarding the innovation, the surgery, the medical. Is it okay? Well, I think this is part of innovation, because innovation, as my honorable friends put it at the beginning, is not only technological.
Il ne s'agit pas uniquement
it's financial.
Le problème.
We are just doing in the organizational and administrative, but it is organizational innovation, which is, of course, a necessity now, because a lot of deficit we have is in organization and putting value to technology and to what we call hard technology and equipment, whatever. So this is really the essence of innovation, and I'm very glad and happy that you are right using it and it is performing. Thank you very much for the second point is about the young people. Of course, I mean, you have two aspects, that the technology life cycle is also accelerating. I mean, in the some years back, decades, between the idea right to the market, it would take a lot of time, because we have testing, we have engineering, we have a lot of things going on. But now, because of this, right from the laboratory to the market, that pace has accelerated, and it is no wonder that the youngsters have to comply and to put up with the acceleration. So they're also pushing it, but also a necessity of being in line with that acceleration of the innovation dynamic. And the second aspect is as economists, we call it demand-driven innovation. I mean, there is no point. It's a luxury to innovate without any expressed and effective demand. So our challenge right now is how to promote this demand-driven innovation, because a lot of demand are there and no innovation to respond, and a lot of products have been invented and no demand are there. So see, this is really one of the big challenges Africa has to face. And of course, I would like to respond in French à mon cher collègue francophone que je salue, pour lui dire nous sommes très heureux de connaître cette initiative. Nous avons également, dans le cadre de Globelix, organisé une académie francophone de l'innovation à Alger. Malheureusement, on n'a pas été en contact parce que vous nous aurez apporté le soutien nécessaire. Ça s'est très bien passé et je pense que prochainement, dans la seconde édition, on pourrait compter sur votre collaboration et soutien. On est en tout cas avec vous. Merci. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Jeffla. Right.
Thank you. I think the point about whether, the youthfulness of innovation is an intellectual fact in and of itself is very profound. Though it's actually quite interesting that one of the largest surveys of entrepreneurial behavior that I have ever seen suggested that the average age of an entrepreneur was 40 years. And the reason why people tended to turn to entrepreneurship much later in life was because very often it took a long degree of apprenticeship and professional experience to identify where the opportunity was. After 10 or 15 years of doing the same thing over and over again in a particular organizational setting, your insight into where the opportunities might lie is open. So that is an intriguing counterpoint. But then in technology innovation in particular, as opposed to entrepreneurship much more broadly, and here I'm addressing the point about risk, the difference, I think, is that the young technology entrepreneur is not sufficiently vested in the status quo. The participation of the youth in our part of the world, and perhaps most other parts of the world, in the status quo is so limited that they are willing to forego the ostracism that might come because they want to propose a new process. So their willingness to push forward and suffer the political consequences, and I'm using political very broadly in this sense, not necessarily governmental, but very broadly, is much more pronounced. That is what I would say. But there is another question that arose, either implied or sometimes explicit, which is, and I remember Mr. Jerry pointing out about the iPhone and it is true that I would say until recently, the lag time between the usefulness of an innovation and the life cycle of its applicability, that conjunction was fairly elastic. So penicillin was still useful and probably is still useful after decades of invention. So Africa could sit by and say, look, all technology is good technology. So long as the innovation is beneficial, if somebody is going to bring it down to Africa, we are fine. The problem with that logic is that over a period of time, that convergence between, or rather compression of the life cycle of applicability of technological innovation has made it impossible, if you are not close to the cutting edge, to benefit enough. Let me give you a very good example. There is one of the most fascinating technology companies in Africa now. It's a company called Iroko, which is a mass distributor of African creative output. So they've taken Nollywood, which is the African counterpoint to Hollywood, online. Now, Iroko started off by using platforms built by Google. So they were distributing via YouTube. Very quickly, it became obvious to them that there was a glass ceiling they could not cross. They had to develop their own local video-on-demand platform. And that was because the global economics that enabled Google to make YouTube free or to charge very little for YouTube or to develop partnership programs at a certain point doesn't benefit an African entrepreneur. To give you another very interesting example, the point about Apple iPhones, people forget that the ecosystem around the Apple iPhone that makes it so profitable is not just the device, but it's also the iTunes ecosystem. If you look at most of the global platforms, whether it's payments or etc., a lot of them prevent Nigerian and Ghanaian entrepreneurs from participating in the payments ecosystem. So if you have a Ghanaian credit card or a Nigerian credit card or credit card from certain countries, you cannot do PayPal. You cannot do Braintree. You cannot do certain payment platforms, etc. Now, this has effectively shut a wide range of potential technology innovators from Africa from being the global marketplace. Now, what that tells you immediately is that there is opportunity in Africa to set up our own data systems, our own payment system, etc., to prevent ourselves from further exclusion, because the gap, the time when you could say, oh, 10 years, it will be Africa's time. So don't worry, let them invent everything. That time has changed because the life cycle of a technology and its application is compressed. So you need to be close to the cutting edge.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. One of the great things about being the first plenary is that your job is mainly to raise questions. The more difficult part of providing the answers will come in the workshops and the other plenaries. And I think you'll agree with me that our panelists have done an excellent job of presenting those questions and, in fact, some ideas of where we might be looking for solutions. My job has been easy. Thank you very much.